Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Reworldings, Indigenous Imaginaries for Conservation Futures. My name is Erin Sikora, and I'm the curator of contemporary art at the Art Gallery of Guelph, and it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's event. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the territory that I am joining from. So I'm currently in Guelph at the gallery, on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, and the current treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I know we have guests tuning in from across Turtle Island tonight, so please, if anyone would like to type in the chat and let us know where they're joining from, please take a moment to do so. All right, so I'm going to introduce you to tonight's moderator and host, the curator of Reworldings, Alexandra Nordstrom. Alexandra is a cultural worker, curator, researcher, writer, and art historian living and working in Montreal. Multidisciplinary in nature, her work focuses on the resurgence and study of Indigenous knowledge systems and culture, with a particularly focus on Cree worldviews, land-based learning, and creative practice. Alexandra is a PhD candidate in the Department of Art History at Concordia and is co-curator of the Poundmaker Museum and Gallery and is one of the co-directors of the Sarasa Performance Laboratory, Inc. So very excited to have you, Alexandra, and all of the artists in Reworldings tonight. So I'll pass things off to you.
Thanks, Erin. I'm excited to be here too and have this opportunity and space to reflect with everyone. Um, so thanks everyone for joining us tonight. Over the past 2 years, the Unsettling Conservation Collective has been exploring questions around what it really means to care for our ecosystems beyond the frameworks we've inherited from colonial conservation. The artists of the collective have each spent time in specific places with layered and complex histories, including Batoche and Waterton, Hopedale, Nene, and Wood Buffalo. And through video installation, sound, material practice, and more, they open up ways of listening to lands and waters and the beings and stories that live there. So today, each artist will share a bit about the site that they've been working with and talk through how their processes of making and collaboration have taken shape over the course of the past 2 years. So as we begin our conversation, I'd like for us to think together about what it means to enter into a relationship with place. How does collaboration with people, communities, and more than human kin reshape our ways of making? And what might art teach us when it comes to how we think about conservation? I offer these questions as an entry point to ground our discussion and to open space for reflection together. And with that, I'd like to begin by welcoming Melaw to start us off.
Hi, my name is Melaw Nakehk'o. I'm Dene Suflene. I'm from Tlitlikwe and Tlitzoke in Denende, also known as the Northwest Territories. I am an artist, high tanner, filmmaker, and I'm one of the artists in the exhibit. So Unsettling Conservation, Reworlding. I traveled to Denende, land of our ancestors, which is on the east arm of Tuninde, also known as the Great Slave Lake. We don't like to say that. In an area I don't like to call it the Great Slave Lake because back in the day they refer to us as the Slavey Dene, which is really awful. So I am Dene Suflene on my mom's side, and I'm Dutch Dene on my dad's side. And I was raised in Tlitlikwe, which is along the river, the Decho River, also known as Mackenzie, and would spend growing up sometimes in the summertime and spending time with my grandmother and traveling to Tlitzoke. So I didn't really have a whole lot of I didn't spend as much time on the land in this area as I had on the river. And so when this project came up, I was either going to do work, I was going to do work in the Ndeji, which is a protected area that we just had protected with in the Decho region, the Decho Nation. And it's kind of like this plateau. It's really abundant and beautiful. And so that was where I originally thought that I was going to be working in. And then I usually travel to Little every year in June for annual high tanning camp, and I was talking to some of my cousins there, and um, was really interested in learning more about Nene and my traditional territory in this area, um, and going to places where my grandmother would travel, my grandparents would travel. And so, with talking with my cousins, and it was okay, I had decided to work in Nene, and okay, now it's not. Oh, there. So this is a map of Nene. They were they I know that Lisa Kay was working for a really long time to implement a protected area, and it started almost way back with my great grandfather in like the 60s or something like that. My great grandfather was Jean Lockhart, and he was a hereditary chief of Lutz Kay. And so from there, they've been talking about creating a protected area, and it was just signed in 2019. And the whole, so this is like the whole traditional area. And there's another map with like our Denisuflene place names. It's like, oh, oops. All right. Well, okay. So before that video played, I wanted to show this map. And in the center of this map, there's where the waterfall is, the Lady of the Falls. And so in our history, in Denisuflene history, there was a woman, and she was an old woman, and they were traveling following the giant beavers, and she was disrespected, and so she stayed behind and she was praying, and she was in this area, and she turned into the waterfalls, the Lady of the Falls, and she told because how she was treated. She was talking to the creator, and the creator told her that she had to stay here in this river and create the falls from it flows from Artillery Lake down into where Desnecha is, and then into Tuninde, and that she needed to be protected, um, and people would have to go and visit her and pray for protection and for our health and for um, and she would take care of the land forever um, if we honored her. And so, because she's here protecting this area for us forever, this is where this she's the heart of Nene, of the creation of the protected area. And so the next slide was the video of flying over Nene. I mean, flying over the waterfalls, and she's right there. And so when we talk about place and sacred places and places that mean a lot to us, and like the purpose of um like creating these safe places and creating like these protected areas, indigenous protected areas, conservation areas, these are the places that we're protecting. Like this is one of our Dene laws, one of our first Dene laws for our people, for the Dene Sutherland people in this area, is she told us that we had to go and honor her and pray for her and ask for health and for her to take care of us. And as long as we were visiting her and praying and honoring her, she would protect this whole entire area for us to continue our way of life. And so um, that's one of the reasons why I chose Nene, and that was one of the reasons um, that like spending time here and like I've always known about the Lady of the Falls. We know about her since we were little. We're told the stories and that there's people that hike here every year. And I've always wanted to do that. I didn't get to do that on the trips that I took, but I was able to fly over on our way to Artillery Lake and one of the places that I was able to visit in the park. This is a sign in Flutzoke that my son took in June of 2024. Um, and that's during Hide Camp in Flutzoke. I usually go with my son every year. And there's is my youngest son, Bez, and I. This is in Fort Reliance, like one of the old communities near Desneche, like near the mouth of the river, the Lockhart River that um, like flows into Chinandé from the through the falls. And this is my older son, Ahea. He also came with me on our trip to Artillery Lake. And with this opportunity, with this project, I was able to take my kids with me on two different trips so that they could also see where our traditional territory is from and spend time with our community and 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 be a part of the community camps. This is a camp at Desneche, and with part of my piece, I have like the structure, like the cap kind of structure with videos. And when I think about Thaiden and Nene, and I think about all of the work that Lusoke has been doing over the past years, and they now have Nihad Niha, which is like guarding the guardians, and it's a year-round program of people of um, land users that go out and monitor the lands, and they they go out in all seasons, so in the winter time, and so they'll be out there setting up camps like this with canvas tents and wood stoves and using tarps um and we've been living like this for since forever, in using the materials from the land and poles. And I and every pole tarp structure is different. It always looks so unique, and I always love the tarps, like the sound of the tarps in the wind. And sometimes if you have a tarp in a smoking teepee, or you're smoking meat, or you're smoking hides, the tarp has like the pattern of the pole on it. And so I was hoping that I was going to use like leftover tarps from some of the camps, but it's just like when you're flying in and flying out of these remote places, like packing and taking things that you need is always kind of tricky, because whenever we leave, we have a plane full of trash as well, because we don't want to leave anything behind. And this is and so with the tents, with like my structure of the tents, this is a photo that we got to visit. It's over the above the tree line, and these are rocks that form a tent ring. So they have moss covering them. So these are probably hundreds of years old, like at this old campsite. And there's four tent rings in this area, which is really close to the caribou fencing that is up over these rocks that we got to visit. So where the caribou would walk over. So they had camps here, um and just like some more of how we live on the land, how we still live on the land. And it's inspired my piece. And this is um, my relatives in this printed out. It's like a really long family tree of like how we're all like cousins. And so they gifted this to me one of the trips up. It's like there's my great grandfather, Jean Lockhart, and my grandmother, Judith, my grandpa, Joe. And that's working on a moose hide in Flitzoké at high camp. And again, like with the piece there, it's like full structure with the ropes that are tying the tarps up. And so that's like reflected here in how we string up our moose with the blue rope. And this is in Desnecha, the kids playing in the river. And more camp structures and like camp life. And that's my presentation.
Thanks, Mila. I appreciate you sharing, and it's nice to see the maps and hear the stories from Dene Long. The one thing that's coming up for me is the importance of visiting and visiting with place, spending time with place, and what that means and what that looks like. And I feel like that's also reflected in your camp structure too, and the way that you've brought, the sound of the wind in there, and it's like this embodied um, engagement with place, but also with people and that connection across time too, in your projections to the videos of like, where the old tents were. Um, it makes me think a little bit more about Michelle's work. Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself and talk about your work? I know visiting and spending time together was a large part of your process in terms of, yeah, storytelling and gathering stories.
Definitely. Yeah. My name's Michelle Wilson. I'm a settler, artist, and a researcher. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Guelph, and I'm going to share a presentation that's a bit more scripted, I think, because I feel this responsibility that I've worked with so many people on this project, and it's not just me, and I want to represent everyone well, and the process. So forgive me for doing something a bit more scripted, but I just want to make sure I honor everything that's been shared with me. The site that I worked with was Wood Buffalo National Park, and my interest in Wood Buffalo National Park goes back to my PhD dissertation, which examined bison as provable subjects, as symbols, as beings that were transformed into instruments of settler colonialism through Western conservation movements. And as part of that work, you can see on the side here, this white map, I created an interactive textile map, tracing the movements of 5 bison calves that were taken into captivity in the 1870s, and then the transfer of their descendants over the following century. Each of the thousands of silver threads that you see on this piece represents a bison that was captured and managed under the guise of conservation. And when viewers touched the strands, they activated different audio stories connected to that lineage. So in researching this narrative, I discovered that its endpoint was actually Wood Buffalo National Park, because between 1925 and 1928, over 6,000 young plains bison infected with tuberculosis and brucellosis were shipped there. During the research for this project, I encountered a Briar Patch magazine article by Chloe and Robert Granjam. That article was a speculative letter to their future children, envisioning a moment of reckoning and renewal between Parks Canada and Indigenous people in the area. So I reached out to Chloe and Robert, and they were so generous and consulted with me on writing this piece called Apology, which wound up being a script that Parks Canada could use to begin to atone for what has been done in Wood Buffalo. It would be a gesture towards accountability rather than closure. And through this process, researching this apology, we uncovered deeper and more troubling questions like, how the infringement on Indigenous hunting rights and the state's slaughter of bison were bound up with the violence of nearby residential schools. These connections revealed how conservation policy, far from neutral, continues to shape life and loss in the park. Those questions and relationships continue to guide this ongoing project. So the question was, what kinds of histories, stories, or presence do you feel the site holds? And by the site, we mean Wood Buffalo. So I'm going to answer this by saying the piece and what love that is, which you see, and what love is that, which you see here, feels like the best way to begin answering this really complex question. So before ever visiting Wood Buffalo, I had read through thousands of archival documents from multiple branches of government through Library and Archives Canada. And from that research, I developed this kind of like abstract understanding of how the land had been altered through the structuring logic of settler colonialism, through the expulsion of harvesters and guardians, the mass killing of wolves, the damming of rivers, and the relocation of bison, et cetera, et cetera. And so in this piece, you can see traces of those histories in the bricks that form the cairn there. They carry fragments from archival texts, including excerpts from the 1930 Parks Act, which declares the parks, quote, dedicated to the people of Canada for their benefit, education, and enjoyment. And then also it goes on to say it authorizes the government to purchase, expropriate, or otherwise acquire any lands, including the lands of Indians for the purpose of a park, and to remove from a park and prevent the return of any persons guilty of an infraction. So Wood Buffalo then is a living embodiment of these colonial histories, but that's only one, very short layer of its being. And so in the sculpture, the cairn soil, and then the strands that you see here that reach down evoke ongoing and living relationships. So these are touch-sensitive sinew cords. And when you touch them, they trigger 7 conversations that share stories of the land before the park, of resistance to the criminalization of lifeways and the residential school system, and the continuing practices of harvesting and protection that sustain this place. So the direction of this project has been shaped at every stage through collaboration. The audio that's woven through this piece and what love is that was gathered through conversations that Chloe and Robert Grandjam had with elders in their community. These voices ground the work in lived relationships and responsibilities to the land. I often return to the words of Elder Ruth McCurdy, who said in her conversation, quote, "A lot of our elders say our animal kingdom represent medicines. Every animal brings something to us, maybe more than one thing. We need to open our minds to that and not be so fearful. They put so much fear into our people from contact up. Back in the day when we walked with the animals, no fear. We need to step up and start helping them. It's our turn now. They're in trouble. Mother Earth is crying out." I don't do it justice. You need to go and touch it and hear it in her own words, but I wanted to share that. And for me, this sentiment captures what collaboration has meant in this work. Learning to listen deeply, to let relationships, care, and ceremony guide the process rather than extractive research methods. And what love is that was co-designed with Chloe and Robert through conversations around the kitchen table. And the cairn itself is anchored by a bison skull that they gifted to me. Every element, the materials, the voices, the gestures of care, arose from that collaborative practice of reciprocity and relational accountability. So each work in this series carries the trace of time spent together on the land. In May of last year, I spent 3 weeks in residency with the Wood Buffalo Arts Council. And later that summer, my family stayed with Robert and Chloe Grandjam and their family for 2 weeks. So this piece here, Yancey emerged from an afternoon sitting with Yancey Kaskaman in his truck in Fort Chipewyan and talking about his childhood memories and how young people today are reconnecting with the land. And the story map and audio that came from that visit reflect the intimacy of those conversations, the warmth, the humor, and the care that travels through the story. The piece Robert that's on this side, grew from time spent with Robert Grandjam Sr., so the other Robert's father, and sitting on a bench overlooking the Peace River after a week together at Moose Island. I listened as he spoke about the relationships between bison and dogs and about how those stories hold knowledge of kinship, responsibility, and survival. Both works were created in collaboration also with Chloe and Robert Jr., who harvested the hides that are in these pieces, and also with Quinn Smallboy, who designed and built the sculptural components. And even this map piece called Warden's Watch, which was based on historical park warden maps, became a kind of, or a form of collaboration. Whenever I worked out on the land, people would recognize the bend in this river or a familiar trail and share their stories. These moments of conversation, recognition, and making together shaped not just the artworks themselves, but also the relationships that sustain the project. At the heart of my practice are the ethics that guide me as a settler artist, engaging with legacies of harm. Questions of where and how it is right and appropriate for me to do this work in a good way. My approach is rooted in anti-colonial practice, which I understand as distinct from decolonial work. Anti-colonial work calls attention to the systems I'm implicated in through my own positionality, while resisting the impulse to take up space or center myself within Indigenous-led efforts to imagine decolonial futures. This is a path that must be walked reflexively and in dialogue. It requires asking, what am I asking of others? And what am I offering or bringing forward in return? This is the foundation of reciprocity. And for me, in material terms, it means sharing privileges and resources that I have access to, bringing food, offering honorarium, and ensuring that collaborators are supported and recognized as the experts of their own lands and lives. I hold the work that you've seen here today, not as as a caretaker, but not as an owner. Whenever the work is exhibited or published, I go back and seek permission. I share any associated fees with those who contributed their voice and stories. And ultimately, the works don't belong to me. They will be returned to those who shared in their making. And even the didactics with Alexandra's help are written intentionally to reflect the collective authorship, to resist inherited conventions that privilege the singular artist instead honor the collaborative relational nature of this practice. So I hope that viewers, especially those who care about conservation, biology, knowledge formation, and policy, engage with this work and begin to see that the ways things have been done have caused great harm that continues to live on in both people and the land. I want them to recognize how we continue to enact these same systems and to feel genuinely challenged in their understanding of ecological knowledge and research. I hope they come to see that these questions can be approached not only with the mind, but also the heart and the spirit, and that's why we make art. And that transformation isn't about minor tweaks or trying to fit Indigenous knowledge into broken Western frameworks. It's about humility and slowing down and leaving ego behind and learning how to be of service. So the title of the Cairn piece, and what love is that? It comes from something that I heard Chloe say over and over again in the recordings. And I think it's a phrase that cuts both ways, you know, when directed toward colonial conservation systems that are built on saviorism and control and dispossession. It asks us, what kind of love is that? And yet, when spoken of the land and animals who sustain us, it becomes a celebration of reciprocity and care. Like, what love is that? And I want viewers to carry that duality in their hearts and their minds. And I put this video in because I was embroidering the map by the river, and I have my air horn in case the bears came. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about just what comes to mind first when I think about conservation, which is like definitely me looking at something over there and being super precious and fragile and careful not to touch it and keeping it excluded from everything. And I want to hear from Adrian next because I feel like Adrian's work really shows that, you know, animals, land, waters, they can take care of themselves. You know, we're all here together and we don't have to have that paternalistic approach to engaging with our ecosystems. So, Adrian, I'd love if you could, yeah, introduce yourself and
Yeah,
share a bit about your work. Thank you.
sounds good. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Just want to make sure. I'm just going to put on a little bit of a slideshow on behind me, just to as a background. Let's just see how this is going to work. Okay, there you go. Okay, can you still hear me? Still hear me? Okay, good. Okay, no ksukwa. Nestudi danago apo yiskumapi ksukawauta ni tutu siksika. Hello, everybody. My Blackfoot name is Little Brown Boy. I'm speaking to you from my studio here on the Siksika Nation in Blackfoot territory. I just have these slides, and they're so funny. I can't figure out the timing of them because they're just going by really fast. Anyway, nonetheless, I just wanted them to be the first part of the background. I just want to also offer thanks to Alexandra and Aaron and the good folks at the Art Gallery of Guelph and Michelle for a lot of the facilitation of this project. We all started back in the day with the Gardenship project, and so it's sort of evolved into this. So very grateful for that. Maybe just as a background, when I was approaching this project, I sort of I was working in the original sort of iterations of guardianship with bees. And I had worked a lot with the Bumblebee Society here on my nation and stuff like that. But I think if anybody knows me well, I might do a lot of work with bison and the history of the bison, Ini in Blackfoot. And so I really decided to focus, and I was trying to come at it from a number of different angles, really looking at the survivance of the bison in particular, and the history of that. I was also looking at the genetics and how that came to be, the science around that in terms of the part of that survivance of the bison. But really, it really just boiled down to the history of its survivance. And it really came from a story, and I think Michelle will attest to this. We were trying back in the guardianship days, we were trying to track down this particular story of walking coyote and this buffalo who had, or he had come into Blackfoot territory and had taken a number of calves back to Flathead territory in Montana. And he had a Blackfoot wife, and there was all these sort of stories, but I could never really find the true story. And I'll be honest, to this day, I'm still sort of wondering what the actual story is, because in my experience of doing the research around this, a number of different stories came to me. And in the exhibition, you'll see my very first drawing of walking coyote with the little bison behind him, and that was based on the very first story with his Blackfoot wife. But as it turns out, I don't think that was the case. There were some other sort of iterations as well. But the truth was that those bison did come from Blackfoot territory into Flathead territory. So that, I think, is the crux of the whole story. But what also occurred as well is that the expansion of the survivance and the number of players in the survival of the bison grew. I could never really sort of ever sort how many actual bison were left after the slaughter. We know that there weren't very many, if that the herds were very small, but there were a number of herds all around the United States and Canada, very small herds, and it was from these herds that the herds that we see today came from, and it's a very interesting story. Um, I'll just let this slideshow finish off, and then I'll move into some of the artworks. Very grateful to Waterton Parks. who hosted me, and Kimberly Pearson, and a number of the conservation officers who were Blackfoot, who hosted me during my time in Waterton. Maybe just a little bit of background. Waterton experienced uh, a uh, a major fire a few years back, the Kino fire, which almost destroyed the park in itself. So it was really going into the park and sort of seeing that history and or seeing the results of that fire and hearing sort of the stories around, especially from the conservation officers, on how those fires revealed a lot of the archaeological history of that park. And so that I thought was really interesting. In particular, they were sort of showing the history of migration through the park and the Blackfoot history as well, that I thought was really very revealing overall. Um, just as one little sort of example is that as the glaciers receded, migration happened in, and if you look on the mountains at the different strand lines, that's actually where a lot of the camps have been found. You think they would be in the valleys, but they were in fact up in the mountain sides, and I thought that that was really very interesting, something I had never thought about. And then within the forests themselves, a lot of the archaeological bones and stuff that were found after the fires sort of revealed a lot about the history of the park as well. Okay, I will stop sharing this one. Okay, cool. There we go. Where do I want to go from here? So, about the history of the bison, I'm just going to bring up. So, really, what happened was is that I decided to, as a artist, my first love is painting. So I wanted to paint a lot of the experience with the bison. Um, Waterton Lakes has a small herd. There's about 20 animals in that herd. And basically, during the Kino fire, they decided to evacuate that herd. So they basically got all the animals out except for one, and it was the bull. And it was so interesting because, of course, they were very brokenhearted in the sense as they left the bull, thinking that it would perish in the fire. Upon returning to the park, and to their delight, the bull had survived. And I think that that for me was really summed up the history of the survivance of the bison, that they are incredibly resilient. Even in a major wildfire, it lived. And where it lived was around this water hole that was in the bison paddock. Of course, the bison would go to the water hole. It was just like one of those things that just, of course, it dawns on you that I think common sense and I think all of us hopefully have it, and we just sort of go there. So for me, it really felt important to sort of paint that and sort of speak to that in particular, and the sort of what is it, the memory of that time. And the whole landscape was burnt and such, and I did the largest painting I've ever done to date for this exhibition. And again, looking at the water hole and the one little bison in the middle of it, so the very tiny bison, and the landscape being dominant, because it is the landscape that helps us survive in many ways, but it also can be very deadly. And I think it's one of those things that in our time, especially as climate change sort of envelops us, and the wildfires that are still occurring, and all the unseasonal warm weather, sure, it's nice to have the nice weather, but in the back of my mind, it's always like, geez, this is unusual. And the fact is that if it continues, like Alberta in particular has been in a pretty big drought for the last number of years. I just had a friend who came from the glaciers who just said to me, he just shook his head and said, it's not going to be long before the glaciers are gone. And the fact is, that those glaciers feed the very rivers that flow through my nation. And so, of course, that starts to, you start to get a little concerned, well, a lot concerned about, well, what's going to happen when the water goes. And of course, it's in our time and it's been accelerated. So, there is an emergency out there, and I think as artists, responding to that is something that we do. So I was, that's something that sort of really was dawning on me. Anyway, the last thing I just want to sort of share is the buffalo robe. I think I got about a couple minutes left here. Just as a background, I was transferred the right in the Blackfoot tradition by Bruce Wolfchild and Sophie Tailfeathers to actually do pictographs on bison robes. So it's a honor that I feel very strongly in maintaining. So I've done a number of robes in the last little while, and it just so happened that this project really lent itself well to creating a robe that spoke to the survivants. So in the Blackfoot Way, we tell the stories in sort of a spiral from the center outward. And so the center of this particular robe is the creation story, how Napi picked up the dirt and blew into his hand and created the buffalo, the food for the Blackfoot people. And of course, the abundance of the bison around it. And then as you move through the colonial history of the arrival of settlers and the disease and the shooting of the bison and stuff like that, the coming of the national dream and all those events that sort of shaped to the fact of the actual decimation of the bison. So all the buffalo skulls that surround all of that is just sort of speaking to the end in many ways of our way of life. But then it sort of starts moving into the history and all the different characters. And I did promise to Alexandra and Aaron that I get them a cipher for this, and I will. I will get it to you. But all the individuals who played different roles in it, and up here, of course, the Walking Coyote story, the different characters, Winnipeg and Wood Buffalo National Park, as Aaron, or not Aaron, as Michelle mentioned earlier, is in there, and the creation of all the national parks in Canada have a lot to do with bison history, especially out here in the West. And even into the States and Yellowstone and Park and stuff like that. Custer Park over here. I have my little Custer here with the fellow with the with the tomahawk going after Custer. So you have to sort of look at these things, I think, that are very kind of tongue in cheek as well. But then it sort of moves right up to the top here of the Buffalo Treaty. And the Buffalo Treaty is currently something that's going on, and over 40 First Nations have signed it, and it's really looking at the notion of the allowance of the bison to roam free in the land they once roamed. And I think that that's really important. Leroy Little Bear and his wife Amethyst are the creator of the Buffalo Institute. So I think it was a really wonderful opportunity for me to take a snapshot of history and the survivance of the bison and put it all onto a bison robe, which now becomes a part of the history of the story in a Blackfoot way of the survivance of the bison. And of course, I'll be doing many of these robes into the future. And as I sort of threw around it, I have like the abundance of the bison, which I hope to happen, a little white buffalo in there for the sacredness of it. And then in the very far corner, I have Buffalo Boy and the Shaman Exterminator as artists. So, a little humor to play in there as well. And so that's kind of my process overall, and it's something that I'm very grateful for having the opportunity to do this. And again, thanking everybody who has brought us to this point. And so, thank you so much.
Thanks, Adrian. I appreciate it. I am really stuck on something you said about responding to the urgency. I think survivance is the question of our time, of our existence right now. And in responding to the urgency and the health of ourselves and our planet, I think I want to move to Sheri next because I feel like Sheri's doing some really incredible experimentation with materials of how can we respond to have reciprocal relationships with our ecosystems, with the materials that we use, giving back and receiving in that way. So yeah, Sheri, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Tansi Kiawao. Hello, everyone. I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right, so Tansi Kiawao, Sheri Osden Nault, Tishinikashun, Michif, Nia. Hello, everyone. My name is Sheri Osden Nault. I am joining the panel today from the traditional territories of Adrian, for one. So the Blackfoot Confederacy, as well as the Tsuut'ina and the Stoney Nakoda nations, signatories of Treaty 7. I'm a guest on this land. I am Métis of the Charette, Boulange, and Nault, or Nault, as I was raised to say it, and French people always give me trouble for families. I First off, feel so fortunate to get to present after Melaw and Michelle and Adrian, and felt like such beautiful resonance in what each of you was talking about. Melaw, like I have such a familial connection to Batoche, especially like historically and ancestrally. And so I was like, oh, do I feel too inclined to talk about that, and kind of nervous? And then you started talking about your family connection, and that was like just beautiful for me to see. And then one of the things I've been so in awe of as this Unsettling Conservation project, which led to the Reworldings exhibition, has developed, is that myself, Michelle, and Adrian have been making work that reflects on buffalo or bison. And I think that that's representative of how much of so-called Canada, where we were doing these projects, has been impacted by and is, and should be, and hopefully will be in the future, as per Adrian's robe, home to massive bison herds. So yeah, I feel like I can't talk about what I was planning to talk about without really acknowledging those things that have been so impactful and relational also as this work is developed. What led me to pursue an art residency at Batoche was the familial and ancestral connections I have to the lands near and at the Batoche National Historic Site. I come from generations of Métis people who were displaced west across so-called Canada following the Red River Rebellion. Some people don't like to call it a rebellion and call it a resistance, but I don't mind thinking of my ancestors as rebels. It's relevant to note that part of why settlers, surveyors, and colonial legislators felt that Métis families should not hold claim to the lands at the Red River was because of their lifestyle, which was structured around the buffalo hunt, where for much of the year, their homesteads would be empty while the inhabitants, not only the hunters, but their families, traveled on the hunt as a roaming community. Following the rebellion at Red River, displaced Michif, the word for ourselves in our language, like my relatives, began to settle along the South Saskatchewan River. On the South Branch, on land we today refer to as Batoche, Treaty 6 territory, about an hour's drive north from Saskatoon, and near One Arrow First Nation. Or on the North Branch, which heads west towards Battleford, where our wonderful curator Alexandra is from, and which is one of the locations where my family has historically lived as they kept moving west. In addition, many Métis people consider Batoche to be culturally and historically significant and gather each year near the end of July for Back to Batoche Days, which is a huge event that part of my project coincided with. So, as per that description I just gave, this is a image supposedly of the area around Batoche in 1885 from a 1973 book that is an Indian Affairs publication called Batoche National Historic Site. So, it's sort of all about where I went, but from a very different time period. And you can see Battleford on there. You can see Duck Lake, which is one of the places my family also lived. And there's so much going on there that I think it kind of describes about the times. So in addition, it was challenging for me to prepare for this presentation because all of the documentation of the time I spent at Batosh, all of the planning for this project, and then the initial versions of preparing for this exhibition coincided with and intersected with my father being diagnosed with ALS. Sorry, I wrote something down here. I'm going to look at that instead. Landmark moments in planning, visiting the land, and creating artworks that led up to the Reworlding exhibition intersected with my father receiving an ALS diagnosis, making trips to drive him 5 hours each way from Grand Prairie to appointments at a specialized clinic in Edmonton, spending a month caring for him in August 2024 and moving him into assisted living immediately following having been back to Batosh. And ultimately his passing in October of last year. So this is one of possibly the last image of me and my father together. My mom, who they split when I was like 9, but was a friend of his near the end of his life, took it sneakily. And while I look like a lump of black jean, I do not give a shit. I love this photo so much. Sorry for swearing. Uh, and the thing about being in Batosh is that it was so familially connected for me, and my Métis side of my family is my father's side of the family. So one of the things that I was doing as I was there and he was increasingly physically disabled was sending him photos of what I was getting up to, buying books about Métis history that intersected with our family history and sending him copies of those books and then reading the same books and talking about them. And so this deep land-based relationship wasn't something that I anticipated would kind of intersect with such a huge moment in my life in this way, but it really did. And so I don't think that I can talk about one without talking about the other, not if I'm going to do so in a sort of honest way. And so my father's name was Daniel Raymond Nault. In this photo, which was given to me by Sheri Osden, a Métis historian, the young man who is sitting on the floor is named Daniel Nault. That is the brother of my great-grandfather. So he would have been born in Jackfish Lake. He would have been one of the first students to attend the residential school in Duck Lake. And he would have also probably been my father's namesake, given that he was my great-grandfather's brother. And then at Batosh, there is a graveyard with gravestones for the people who died in the Battle of Batosh. And this gravestone of Daniel Charette likely is, I mean, I can't know. I wasn't there. I don't know who was inspired by who. Likely exists in relation to, okay, he clearly didn't die in the battle. But anyways, this connection of the name is throughout the sort of land and the time I spent there, and I can't kind of separate those things. I also, hold on. Oh, where'd the picture go? I have something really funny. It might be further slideshow. Okay, I'm going to jump around. I also, while I was at Batosh, literally left my blood there, thanks to this little fella and my friend's very funny edit that they made of it. After removing this tick from myself and trying so hard to not get bit by a tick after my June visit to Batosh, didn't have the heart to squish it and brought it back out to the land a couple days later. So I was like, okay, you guys just literally get my blood. Great. And yeah, there's so much that's heavy and there's so much that's beautiful about that kind of interrelationship. Sometimes in art making, there's unexpected nuances and connections, ones you couldn't possibly anticipate. This project taught me a lot about letting go of control. And like literally, it was the project that taught me those things. But that lesson obviously came at such an important time in my life for me to have that lesson. And it allowed me to create artwork that wouldn't aim for permanence, but be designed to return to the land gently or hopefully even benefit the land. And it set in motion the creation of the artwork that is at or in the Reworldings exhibition, which, despite having been in the planning process before my father's passing, feels like a massive metaphor for cycles of life and death. So it's interesting how those things happen, even without us kind of planning for them. One of the things that is so incredible and special about bison is the way that they affect the land that they live on. So my project originated in learning about the transfer of lands at the Batoche National Historic Site to the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. And in December 2023, the return of environmentally critical and culturally sacred bison to those lands in the form of a young bison herd, which I did not see in my whole time at Batoche, but that's fine. It doesn't need to be about a spectacle. It was about relating to the land. They were off living their lives, not being harassed by interested people like me. And that is totally chill. I also felt a lot of resonance with Michelle's mention of visiting, which was such an important part of being on the land. Um, so I'm gonna look at some more of my notes now to kind of ground me, because I knew that I couldn't do this without talking about like my dad and how that connection feels so entwined. But I did have things I actually also wanted to say outside of that. Um, so we were given some generous questions to help guide what we're presenting. And one of those is, how do you begin to learn about a place or enter into a relationship with that place? So many facets of relating, ancestral connections, which I've already talked about, the kind of yearning for a homeland as people who have historically been displaced, the sense of feeling, believing, and knowing that you are connected to a place, but then also having to contend with the fact that you are not the people that remained there, and that there are people there on the land who did, and you have to foster relationships with those people. You can't just return like you've always been entitled. It doesn't in reality work that way. These were really important and beautiful parts of the time I spent visiting Batoche and areas near it. And I organized my residency to coincide with two trips. One in June 2024, where I could begin meeting people and trying to foster connections, and then another one in July, where I was not only making my artwork that I made at Batoche that influenced the artwork that is now in Reworldings, which I will eventually show a picture of instead of just alluding to. And it allowed me to develop connections in a kind of longer term way. And some of that also involved making sure that the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, even though I was dealing more directly with the Batoche National Historic Site, felt connected to what I was doing, because I am somebody who comes from a certain Métis diaspora, and that inclusion was important. You don't just want to kind of fly in, make something about you, and then fly out as like an ego project. That's not really relating, right? And that's not visiting. So I also wrote down in my list of kind of getting to know the land, developing relationship with community that is still there or returned ahead of you, walking, listening, looking, touching, being present and being with the land, which makes me think so much of this image of a whole bunch of prairie sage growing along a path I was walking on. Whenever I come across prairie sage, I like have to touch it. You just like rub a leaf and get the beautiful scent on your fingertips. And it makes me so happy and grounds me. And then letting go of assumptions and expectations, like getting to know someone, you can't decide what the land is ahead of getting to know it. You have to let it tell you, just like you have to let a person tell you. Okay, so there was the little tick anyway. So One of the things that we did at Batosh that was really beautiful was arranged for me to work with a local Métis artist who was also on the regional M&S, um, like government. And Leanna Latondra is her name. And we together, mostly her, with me being like a supporting guy, led a workshop for Indigenous Peoples Day in June, where a bunch of school groups came and learned about dot art because that's the kind of art that she primarily makes. And I also initially organized this kind of small display for the events of that day. And then, so you can see here on the left some of my artwork, and then on the right are Leanna's, and then also at a later time installed this artwork and the seated bison skull, which is on the barrel there, in the sort of gallery space of the visitor center. There's something so beautiful about a visitor center gallery or even this kind of front space where it's not like the white cube, it's not sterile, it's not out of reach, it's not intimidating for people across like different class and life experiences to enter into. And I really love that. Um, and okay, so there's a few other things that I wanted to touch on just in regards to visiting. 10 minutes isn't super long, and I know I'm really jumping around, but like I said, I had a lot of big feelings trying to prepare for this. I'm just providing the information I can in the ways that it came accessible to me. Um, okay, so looking at my notes here. Thinking about like the importance of the bison on the land. I was talking about plants earlier, and I think Adrian touched on this. When bison are roaming free, they drastically affect the landscape, and it's really important. So you saw earlier all of these different seed packets that I have. There are so many plants, and not just what these seeds are, but these were plants identified by the historic site as to be reintroduced. But there's many grasses and forms of grassland that can't necessarily exist without bison being on the land. When bison are on the land, they're so big, they roll around, they create ruts, and these ruts become micro ecosystems for types of grasses that can't really exist anywhere else. And they're so present on the land, even though there was this attempted extermination. And one of the ways that I thought was kind of uncannily fun that I ran into this when I first got to Saskatchewan and to Saskatoon, where I was staying, was that from the first hotel I stayed in, I looked out my window and there was this fleet of shipping trucks. And then when I looked more closely, I discovered that there was essentially like a kind of hilarious herd of bison outside of my hotel window. And there's this presence absence kind of happening there. And I was so excited to hear Adrian talking about the Buffalo Treaty because I think so many people worry about making animals and their presence palatable for humans. But what we really need, I'll leave it on this photo for now, is to consider the ways that we coexist, and that can't always be about humans first. And that's really special and important to me because like megafauna like bison do not care that you want to pet them, that you want their photo, whatever you want. They belong on the land and they shape it, and they shape it in ways that are going to be really beneficial to humans as we try to go on in a increasingly precarious climate, is how I will put that, as per Adrian's mention of the glaciers. Um, so here's some kind of documentation of my process while I was out there that I'm just going to go through a bit quick. I made my mold making process sort of suited to travel in this case. Seeing my hotel room, you might be like, whoa, buddy, that's rude. I made this look spotless before I left. I also did that recently when I was in Guelph. I sometimes do art making in hotel rooms, especially now that I'm doing this project, which for some reason involves traveling and then making massive molded sculptures. And then I clean up, surprisingly, afterward. This process was so beautiful because it involved being on the land, being with other Métis artists, like Liana Latundra, like many people I visited with and had conversations with. And in this photo is Holly Aubuchon, who was out there with me. And we, in this image, are playing with the remainder of the seed bomb mixture that the bison skull sculpture is made from. So one of the things that I really wanted to do with this project was look at making on the land in a way that wouldn't negatively impact it. And I used advice from Michelle, who is a far more experienced ceramicist than myself, and my prior knowledge of seed bombs, which are usually like the size of a quarter to a loonie, and decided I would make a bison skull out of such a mixture, and luckily, fortunately, did succeed. Here's some of the images of that process taking place on the land, as well as the camera set up to document it. These are images from making the initial latex mold. So this is a bison skull with clay kind of filling different holes and gaps in my home studio at the time, painting on layers of latex, my cat chilling in a window nearby. A really great bracelet on my wrist as I'm kind of packing the clay into that mold out on site at Batoche. And one of the amazing things about working out there was the conversations I also got to have with people coming by while I was there. And this is kind of one of the first instances of one of those skulls really falling apart. The first version of the bison skull that I tried to make on the land had I think equal soil to clay ratios, and it couldn't hold together. And this crumbling is beautiful, but not what I promised I would leave them. So I did manage to make, and this is a later iteration, a skull that would stay together, at least until it got exposed to the elements on the land. And this is just one of the images I took during install in Guelph. That's really special to me, and it reflects the kind of process of trying to translate what a sculpture that is also a seed bomb that is designed to return to the land could mean when you're trying to create something for an art gallery. And so this is an experimental biochar and lime concrete. My lime concrete artist expert, who I interviewed like 9 months ago to learn about making lime concrete, happened to be at the opening. We didn't chat, but she chatted with someone I know. And she was apparently like, oh, that is going to be so hard in 3 months. It was in the mold for a few weeks before being pulled out. And luckily, I had kind of always thought these experiments would fall apart and that that would be kind of part of the beauty of like learning in a visible space and experimenting. And yeah, that kind of really reflects the project and so many different things that I said in the last probably more than 10 minutes. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sheri. I love how you've brought, I love how you've been talking about this idea of letting go to see what happens and paying attention to the unexpected, and embracing that. And I feel like so it can be so generative. And I know for Glenn, he had some unexpected things happen in his planning, but also beautiful community emerged through that. So we'd love to hear from you, Glenn.
All right. Well, Unakut, everyone. Good evening. My name is Glenn Gear. I'm an Indigenous queer multidisciplinary artist, originally from Corner Brook, Newfoundland. I come from mixed Inuit ancestry, heritage. My dad is Inuk from a place called Alatuk Bay. And my mom is a settler from the east coast of Newfoundland with Irish and English ancestry. So the piece that I ended up doing is called Naliunet, which means seasons in Inuktitut. And Nunatsiavut is where, again, my dad hails from. Again, he was from a place called Alatuk Bay. And originally I had a great idea of traveling up to the Torngat Mountains. Now, the Torngat Mountains are really important to a lot of the Inuit within the region. It's the place of the spirits. So let me see if I can just collapse this so I can actually see the map. Anyway, Nunatsiavut is one of four main Inuit regions across Canada. We have the Inuvialuit settlement region in the west, Nunavut, Nunavik, which is northern Quebec, and Nunatsiavut, which is enclosed by Labrador. So I've always considered my ancestral home as being in Labrador and being from Alatuk Bay, which is close to the community of Hopedale. Now, initially, I wanted to work with the national park in the Torngat Mountains and to do land-based research there and have work evolve out of that. It didn't happen 2 years ago during the summer, and it also through repeated kind of work and contact with folks there, it just didn't pan out. So my big idea of going to the place of the spirits and of doing work on the land and really reflecting upon that space. Well, it's on pause until further notice. I'm still hoping that it will come through, but anyway, out of that panic from that initial moment, I I decided, okay, well, where is it I am from, and where are my living relatives are from, and this is Hopedale in Nunatsiavut. And at this time, I was doing some language learning exercises around our dialect in Labrador, in Inuktitut. And my cousins and my relatives were part of this group, this initiative called Inatsiavik. And this was Vanessa Flowers and Nicholas Flowers and Kim Pilgrim in particular. And so I was learning some of the language, and it was through this language learning exercises online that I began to think about like the different seasons and connection to the land, and then kind of shifted and pivoted my way into what this current project became. And it became really meaningful when I kind of reposition the idea of land-based knowledge, connection to land, and also connection to family was right there in front of me all the time. So I like to start off with my presentation with this little husky pup because I love huskies. They're an important part of Inuit culture and livelihood. And my cousin warned me, if you look her in the eyes, she'll imprint and she's yours. You'll have to take care of her, which I realize now isn't so much of a threat, but she was just so cute. And this is just before I was going to Alatuk Bay. I deal with a lot of research into photo archives, and so I like to look at photo archives of Inuit and settler life along the coast. There's a long history of marriage with the fisher folk, the men who came over who married Inuit wives, and many, many generations of people came after that. And I'm part of that history, that heritage. This is one of the communities that my dad grew up in, Makkovik, Labrador. And again, this is from some of the archival uh, research that I did. This sort of lays the foundation for my current ideas and kind of connections to the place, to the history, to the land and people. This is my cousin Brian. We're going to Alatuq Bay. This is a number of years ago. So this is my dad's birthplace. It's where my grandfather lived and died and was buried. And it's only known by the locals how to get there. Again, these are sort of fly-in only communities. It's quite isolated. When the water freezes over and it's safe, you can skidoo across to different communities, but otherwise you're flying in or you fly into a main community and get a boat like I would in Alatuq Bay. So a lot of my work really comes out of a material-based practice. And I like to work with seal skin, seals that have been harvested off the coast of Labrador, um, commercially processed in the island of Newfoundland in a place called Dildo, Newfoundland. Um, and I like to work with these materials and do beadwork. This is sort of a traditional design based. You see them a lot around Christmas time. They're like brooches. A lot of the women wear them. And um, and this was when I was at Anchorage in Alaska and kind of working on these little brooches that I gave away as cultural gifts. While I was there, I also was working with photographing my beadwork and working with these sort of cartoon-like representations of animals that I knew that lived on the land. This is Katangak, which means together, and this is a film still from an animation that I did that features some of my beadwork in a kaleidoscopic fashion and these moving animals that are throat singing to one another. So Inutsiavik is the place to live well, and this is the collaboration that I worked with them and sort of the members, Vanessa, Nick, and Kim, quite extensively. And they're based out of Hopedale, and they do a lot of language and traditional materials-based practice revitalization in the region. They were really generous. They gave me over, I think, 200 photographs when we talked about the idea of living and being on the land. And they're all from Hopedale. They have deep connections to my own family. It just seemed like a really easy fit. And talking about the project, they're like, "Oh yeah, we'd love to share these photographs that we'd taken over a year." And I said, I've learned within the class, we have 6 seasons that are really clearly defined based on what's available on the land through berries, through the fish, through the mammals, and so the hunting practices that coincide with those 6 seasons. So that was really the impetus, I think, for Naliunet and thinking about just the language revitalization and also connection to the land. And these are all youth that are really embracing the culture, but also spreading it and spreading their knowledge in really generous ways. So out of the 200 photographs that they gave me, I pared it down to, I think, 30. So I have 5 sets, basically articulating the 6 seasons. And this is from the opening. So I had a large mural into which was this kaleidoscopic space with beadwork, and that was animated, and the mural with all these animals in black and white that I knew from the region. And then flanking both sides were these really beautiful images of the land that were taken by the members of Inutsiavik. So yeah, this is just a detail of this kind of circular form. Again, thinking about animals that I know, black bear. I've never seen a polar bear, but I have relatives who have hunted polar bear and they're not endangered, um, or have helped to clean the skins and to distribute the meat. Um, Black bears I've seen, caribou I've seen, and of course the Tulagak or raven. The ravens and the crows up in that area, they're around the same size. So you have to look really closely and look at their movements and some of their calls to distinguish between them. So we have big crows and small ravens, and they're about the same size. Um, the Arctic hare, a drake, the seals, of course, whales, ukpik or the owl, and the Arctic char. So these are all animals that I know, and I wanted to create this sort of fun circle and cycle of life. I've included Inuit geometrics, which really come out of the tattoo traditions, sort of combining it all into this hypnotic portal into another dimension, which is something is sort of a recurring theme in a lot of my work. And that's, again, getting back to beadwork and thinking about this space of meditation or this hypnotic space that you can enter that maybe opens up into this other realm. Um, Here's some of the photographs, and I've included the different designations for the 6 seasons in both Inuktitut from the Labrador dialect and in English. Um, so there it's sort of a didactic, but it's also it gives you a glimpse from the point of view of these lovely youth who live on the land, who are collecting and connecting to their homelands, to the waters, um, in a way that I think really is about a concert, a connection to that space, to that place in meaningful and engaged ways. So really thinking about the cycles of life, the 6 seasons, those 6 seasons also kind of paralleling. I'm really obsessed with sixfold symmetry because it relates to snowflakes, and that's apparent in the kaleidoscopic portal that I created. So really thinking about different ways of connecting to culture, to land, identity, place, and just our interconnectedness throughout all those cycles. This is my cousin. I think he's cleaning, looks like seal skin. Yeah. Anyway, I have not been able to go there, so I'm living vicariously through all this, but they have invited me for next spring. They're like, yeah, come during the spring. We'll get you out on the ice. We'll try to hunt some seal. And yeah, it'll be like a whole thing. So I'm really looking forward to that. So I have a chunk of money kind of earmarked for next spring or this coming spring. Um, and yeah, these are just some photographs that they took on the land. And again, this is around the Hopedale region, not too far um, from where they live. And then just having like boil ups and, doing traditional sealskin cleaning and then stretching. In the wintertime, these sealskins, we take them off, and to make them really white, the kids get on them and just slide down hills of snow and stuff. It helps clean the fur and it makes them a little bit whiter and brighter, a little bit more silvery. Um, yeah, they're kind of like, I guess, Inuit crazy carpets, for those of you who remember crazy carpets. And a big part of what I do is to try to build capacity within different communities that I visit. I worked with this lovely woman, Lali. She's hilarious. It was her first animation. That's how I teach them animation skills. I bring equipment there, but I also teach them how to do it with like smartphones and with free apps and do it in a really DIY sort of way. And that gets back into this idea of narrative sovereignty and making stories about ourselves in our own language for our own culture. So it's really through our lens. And this is I also work with a lot of First Nations folks, and this is an Innu community in Sheshatshiu, which is also in Labrador. And I think we're doing some sort of animation project. I think that was a 2-day workshop. And that's it. So Nakamak, yeah, it's a little glimpse of what I do.
Um, I wanted to say that I really appreciate you pointing out the interconnectedness between land, language, and ways of being. Um, because I think that relates to a different way of seeing the world and actually entering another realm of engaging with the world. A little story at the opening, I had my friend came to the show, and she's an ecologist. She studies caribou migration on Fogo Island, and she saw the 6 seasons on the walls. And I introduced her to Glenn because she was saying how her the classification system that she has right now for the caribou don't match their natural rhythms and their natural cycles. And that was really interesting to me because I think that's a perfect example of like, I don't know, we're studying things and we don't even have all the information. We're neglecting a complete worldview that knows intimately, these animals, like that has carried knowledge about them for like many years. I don't know. It's yeah. Anyways, with that story, that really resonated with me. Um, but I want to pose this question to all of you, and I'm curious what you think art might teach us when it comes to how we might approach conservation.
I am so sorry. Can you restate the question?
Yeah, of course. I want to know what you think art can teach us when it comes to how we approach conservation.
Oh, maybe I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I think, of course, art is a different way of seeing. And, often visually, or it can be sound, it can be a number of different things, a number of different media. But I think it really offers just another way of entering into especially into the world of conservation. Because yeah, I think sometimes, in our contemporary world, in our modern world, it can be very scientific, which isn't wrong. But it can be overwhelming in many ways to sort of understand the statistics and stuff like that. And I think in many sort of good ways, I think art is something that people can perhaps it resonates with people perhaps more. It's more emotionally based and empathetic based, I think, in a sense that you have these feelings when you see art, and depending on what you're seeing, will evoke those feelings. So I think it really sort of touches more about our humanity more than anything. I often think of the pictographs that writing on stone, and when I see those, it just really evokes this wonder, and at the same time, it tells a story. And I think it's just another way of telling a story and connects us more in more ways, humanistically, I think, or humanity. So that's kind of what I think.
Thanks, Adrian. I would agree. I think one thing that I've heard throughout listening to each of you speak is the importance of intimacy and intimate moments for building connection and bridging understanding. Um, and like those everyday small little interactions, how those create foundations for relationships to be able to relate to one another. Um, yeah, that's what comes to mind for me. I am curious also, throughout this process, how has working with the collective and with your site and with your collaborators reshaped your ways of making?
This fits with what I was thinking about saying about art and conservation as well. So I'm excited to jump in. I I was thinking about like refusal and how important refusal is. And not only in regards to like collaborating within this project, but also thinking about like Indigenous-led conservation versus, say, like Indigenous consultation in conservation. One of the things that so often colonial governments aren't making space for that they need to and ought to be, but also, you know, people who are approaching Indigenous folks looking for guidance on conservation, is that refusal is also a response. And so I think of refusal in regards to like the art making process for myself, where things, you know, especially when I was at Batosh making the bison skull, the first one that fell apart, I was like, how am I going to do this? And there's that learning in art and there's that learning in relating. Like the land can refuse you. You might find something impassable. You might find yourself with 30 ticks on your jeans and trying to get them all off and then finding that one that got through when you get back to your room. Um, you might come across like a community member who you want to talk with about their experiences on the land. And if you're genuinely trying to have a non-extractive relationship as someone who is visiting and trying to learn, and this happened to me because part of my project was visiting with people and talking about bison in the land, you can plan to eat a meal with someone and they can know that you want to talk about bison in the land and they can just not. And that's its own like beautiful and hilarious way of relating. And to genuinely be in relationship, there has to be room for refusal like that. Um, and so that's my like big impactful collaborative experience was like how collaborating with my materials, with people, with land involved and always had the potential for refusal. You know, even the Batosh National Historic Site was like, okay, we're into this, like when we were first reaching out to them, but we have a relationship with the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. You're not a member of that, and we got to talk to them about it first. And so I mean, I was actually so impressed with the relationship that the historic site had with not only the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, but like um, the Wenero First Nation, which is like right next door to Batosh. And I've since been told that it's probably because they're a historic site, they're able to be like more relational and have less of this kind of from the top down colonial idea of control for conservation. But that relating and being responsible to each other and creating opportunities for refusal is so beautiful and so important when you're trying to collaborate, particularly in community. And then being a part of this collective has just been like really exciting and inspiring because I'm working alongside artists I adore and admire, and who doesn't want to get to do that? Okay, that's all I'm saying.
Thanks, Sheri. I feel similarly. Um, I'm incredibly grateful and appreciative to have worked with all of you, and I feel like my this was a kind of unusual curatorial role where I was coming in and none of you had yet made your work, so I got the chance to speak with all of you throughout your process, and I felt like that was just, I don't know, I loved it. I learned so much, but also it was just really special, and I don't know, there was so much there, and it was interesting to also see you all process your experiences in real time because I feel like in the beginning it was like, I don't know what I'm doing, and then we get to the show and I'm like, you knew exactly what you were doing. So, anyways.
I was just thinking about your question, like I think almost that the questions are connected, that um, making work is about being able to accept like non-linearity, and being able to work iteratively and taking the refusal of the materials or the refusal of the collaborator, not as maybe a shutdown, but like a productive things that can happen and ask you to go back and reevaluate and see what is the no or what is the failure doing. And that maybe in science that's a really difficult thing to accept, is to learn from the to treat the failure as much as a knowledge production moment as the success of your experiment. Oh shoot, there was something else. Oh, this is funny. The point was, yes, the thing that I was thinking was, it's funny, like doing the kind of writing that you have to do, like for a dissertation. You know what this is like, Alexandra. Um, is really was really difficult for me because my brain works like this, and all the ideas are like colliding. And it's funny that I made a web at once, and so to like string them out in a sensical linear fashion to write them down was really difficult. And so I needed an artwork to structure the ideas, right? So I don't know where I was going. Sorry, it's getting late. I'm like, everything's all at once. I guess that, I guess that like thinking through these difficult topics through art, like lets us sit with the ineffable and lets us not believe that we can untangle all the knots and have everything figured out, and that we can just sit with the complexity and not feel that we are entitled to or capable of laying that bare or untangling it all. Yeah, sorry, that was my convoluted answer.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really good point because I think often in Western science, there's such an individualistic aspect of like, I know everything and I can know everything and it'll be straightforward. But that refusal takes you to other places. And yeah, art does allow you to embrace that and it gives you new knowledge for sure. Mila, yeah.
Yeah, so just about how just going about making this work or being a part of this um, group of amazing artists. I went into um, my community and to camp with this idea of being like, oh, I have to like I have to like talk to everybody, I have to make sure everybody knows what I'm doing, and then I have to like just like 3 days like thinking so much about like what does it mean and like all of this like oh like I have to just do all this like ethical research stuff or whatever. And then like the third or fourth day I was just like I'm overthinking what I'm doing and I'm Dene Suflene, I'm on my land and it's just like this is my traditional land. Like I just need to be Dene in my community because this is the whole purpose of having this protected area was for us to continue to live on the land and be on the land and gather together in these areas um and just continue our way of life, our Dene Suflene way of life. And it took me like 3 or 4 days to get to that realization. And it was really like um, it was I think it was really good for me in feeling like it's a like I've been to um Desneche, I've been to different places on the lake. I've been to very different places in the protected area as a child. And my grandparents traveled by boat all the way around the lake. And so I know that where I'm from, and I know that this is where my family's from and my history. But it's just like as an adult, not spending as much time there. And then now, past few years, been going to the high camp in Litsuke since 2012. Not every year, but as often as I can, and bringing my kids and bringing my family. And it's just like like building those relationships. And like my mom came with me a couple of times, and so she was born on the land just outside of Litsuke. um and she speaks Dene Suflene fluently. She's a very good speaker. And so and everybody knows who my grandparents are, so I have like that relationship with the land. But then being there and just making art from inspired by the place felt um, like more of a belonging, and that I was making, like connecting my spirit and my work and who I am right now with the land, and being able to share that.
Thanks for sharing that, Mila. I totally know what you mean, getting out on the land and being like thinking about what I gotta be doing, but then it's like I can literally just exist. I'm just existing and that's okay. But it's interesting to come out of that like conditioning sometimes, it can take a bit. Um, Glenn, I was wondering if you had anything to add or had any dissonant comments.
My brain is shutting down, but I'm so I'm just enamored with this whole group. It's been such a privilege to work with artists that I admire, and I was so excited when the list came. I'm like, oh my God, this is gonna be amazing, and it was, and it is. I just really appreciate everyone's like deep connection to land and to place and the stories that emerge from that. Just even during this conversation, I feel like I've learned so much about bison, buffalo, and I have a deeper appreciation because I didn't grow up with those animals, and so knowing that history is it's just been really wonderful, and it's been lovely to hear of other folks' art process, and uh, the kind of turmoil that we go through in making and creating something that's meaningful, and the kind of missteps and moving through that. It's part of the process. And so I really appreciate everyone's reflections on that. It gives me a lot of hope for the future, and creating these spaces, I think, is so important, not only in terms of thinking about conservation, land conservation, but also it's about building networks and connections with community, with one another across Canada, across our different regions, and understanding the particulars of place and land, and our identities and who we are as these animals, these human beings existing in a world, in concert with other animals and other beings. We have this concept in Inuit culture of Inua, which is like the spirit, and that's a spirit that lives not only in humans and animals, but can also exist in things like rocks or mountains and water. Everything has that connecting spirit, that inherent Inua. So I'll leave it there on that note.
Thank you very much, Glenn. It's been really lovely to hear all of your reflections and to be able to have this conversation with you guys. Thank you for your time. I think we'll maybe wrap it up there.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much to all of you. It's so wonderful to hear more about your process and your practice. Um, I've been fortunate enough to, be working and existing in the space of this exhibition since it opened, and we've had many university classes come through, and it's been so wonderful having conversations with these classes. And um, this is such, yeah. So I just want to say thank you to all of you for this work. For folks in the audience, if you're based locally, this exhibition is on view in Guelph at the Art Gallery of Guelph until January 4th. Um, and for those of you who are further, we are going to be posting a 3D tour of the exhibition so you can zoom around and see all of the artworks and check all of this out for yourself. We also had the pleasure of having a videographer film interviews with all of these artists. So it's always most important to hear about the work directly from these folks. So be sure to keep a lookout for that. All of that will be posted in the coming weeks. And thank you so much, everyone. And I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Great. Right on. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks.
Good night.
Thanks so
Thank you,
much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Akkumek.